In today's video, I want to talk about Angela Carter's comic novel Wise Children, and I want to look at the way in which the five chapters begin. I do this activity with my students during the first lesson that I start the novel with them. And it can be an interesting activity because it gets students to think about what assumptions they will make about the novel. And because the novel is structured in five quite distinct chapters to echo the structure of a Shakespeare play, it can sometimes be interesting to have a discussion about what students expect from that particular chapter. So very simply, all I'm going to do on the left-hand side for each chapter is put in the beginning of the chapter with the question, what is significant? And in the box on the right-hand side will be the main things that students will often mention in terms of important meanings or language or themes and so on. So chapter one is here on the left, and you can see that I've highlighted certain sentences, and these sentences can help with a number of different points, really. First off, the novel begins with a riddle. Why is London like Budapest? Because it is two cities divided by a river, and that's an unusual way to begin a novel. Certainly, the only novel I've read that begins with that kind of opening. So immediately what you have foregrounded is this metaphorical significance of river. It acts as a metaphor because, as we know from reading the chapter and reading the novel fully, that this is very much a play which is to do with family, it's to do with relationships, but it's also to do with being legitimate and being illegitimate. And of course, Dora and Nora have spent their whole lives, 75 years, feeling like they are outsiders to this celebrity Hazard family, which have kind of become celebrities in their own right. So when we get mention of things like the wrong side of the tracks, it isn't necessarily as much to do with which side of the River Thames you are on. It's more to do with the fact that they are using that as a metaphor to say that both of them feel on the illegitimate side of the Hazard family. In the blue section, we have Dora's colloquial and also very energetic style. Good morning, let me introduce myself. My name is Dora Chance. So it's almost as if she is speaking directly to us. And of course, there is the argument that this novel would not work without Dora's narrative style. At the bottom of this extract, we have the expletive or the colloquialism bastard. And that, of course, nowadays is mainly used as an insult, but it stems from a word that meant a child that was born out of marriage or a child that was born out of wedlock, which Dora and Nora were. And again, in the yellow section here, we have this continued metaphor regarding different cities or different places that have some kind of dividing river or some kind of geographical feature which splits a place into two. And that goes back again to this idea of being on the wrong side and the right side of the family. So, chapter one, really in the novel, is all about family relationships, figuring out this quite complex family tree, right from kind of the late 1800s right through until present day. Chapter 2, the narrative continues to have this very energetic but also quite childlike tone here, maybe, because an adult Dora is looking back at the memory when she was 6 and 7 to begin with in Chapter 2. And one of the things that they did when they were very young girls is they were taken to the Worthingtons dance classes in Clapham High Street. So, despite this novel having lots of magic realism to it, there is going to be a point when that illusion and that magic meets reality. And of course, Clapham High Street does exist, the River Thames does exist, Camden High Street does exist, and so on. So, there is going to be a point where the real and the illusion meet. And I suppose because this is a postmodern text, we never quite know what is illusion and what is reality. So the language here, it starts with another exclamative sentence, 1, 2, 3, hop, see me dance the polka. And if you look at the image, that is essentially what they are doing. They're stood at the bar in the dance class, and they are wearing their tutus and their dance clothing, whatever it might be, and they are having their dancing class. So a 75-year-old woman is recalling a memory that is almost as old as she is, in terms of going to dance classes every Saturday morning. Grandma Chance took them, and by this point we know that Grandma Chance is no blood relation. At least that's a mystery, but we assume she isn't. Um, and she becomes their guardian, and she really looks out for them. And she doesn't just give them a roof over their head in 49 Bard Road, but she also looks out for them and is essentially their surrogate mother. Because they are only 6 years old at the beginning of chapter 2, it means that effectively they go on to spend a lifetime on stage. And we also in this section have once a week or once upon a time, to remind us really that we are dealing with fairy tale here, and we're dealing with memory. And memory can be something that can be pleasant to recall, but it can also verge into melancholy. And I do think there is a stem of melancholy running through this novel, which makes some students believe that actually this is more of a tragic novel than a comic one. It's always an interesting discussion to have, maybe, in terms of where comedy finishes and where tragedy begins. And you can tell us from a sentence like wash us, brush us, and do up our hair in sausage curls, Grandma Chance is really this caring guardian figure, despite, of course, her eccentricities. So, chapter 2 is essentially from early childhood right through until late adolescence, when they're about 17, 18, I believe. Chapter 3 begins in the recent past. So, a couple of weeks ago, from the telling of this novel, Dora and Nora went to a cinema in Notting Hill, and they called it a flea pit because literally a place with fleas. It was kind of this dingy cinema. And they went to see the film Midsummer Night's Dream, which is the film that they actually end up going to Hollywood to create in this chapter. We don't know it maybe yet, but that is what they are watching. And there is again this air of melancholy here, because this idea that they are watching themselves on screen when they were young, when their bodies were younger. So there is a degree of nostalgia, but there's also a degree of melancholy. There is this sense of longing of how quickly life does fly by. Of course, this is also a social and historical comment that Carter is making to do with the changing way in which audiences were consuming entertainment throughout the 20th century. So, in terms of television, for example, something that we didn't have at the beginning of the century, but something which many people had at the end. And television and mass media changed the way that people consumed entertainment, and it meant that the kind of the desire to go out to see a show or to see a play started to disintegrate, which is quite sad, because whenever you have kind of mass media that makes it very, very easy for people to consume entertainment, you're going to lose something somewhere. And so many of our grandparents, for example, met when they were out at parties and music halls and cinemas and these kind of things. And, now you wonder, would that happen? Probably not. People tend to meet each other now on apps, for example. So whenever you have mass media, you're going to have something that is lost. And I think what's lost now is this idea of meeting people. We can go for days without meeting anybody because everything is in our homes via electric cables. So, yes, it's also a comment on the decline of the cinema. Um, One of the things that is made clear from this section is the fact that the cinema itself is pretty dingy. But slightly after this, of course, Dora does spot a couple, two men having sex in the cinema. And that cheers her up because she says something like, at least somebody was having fun, because we certainly weren't. watching ourselves on screen when we were younger, now that we are in these kind of used bodies. So there is again a degree of lewdness slightly after this extract, and of course that's what comedy often does. It does descend into the crudeness and to the explicit. I think I've already said in another video, but chapter 4 is my favourite chapter in the novel, and it also begins beautifully. We've got some lovely, beautiful imagery in this section. The zebra running down the high street with the purple stripes in the moonlight, and the purple flowers sprouting from bomb sites, as if to say life goes on even if you don't. There's a degree of beauty there, and a degree of the celebration of living life, rejecting the destruction and mass kind of hysteria and anxiety and worry which a country would experience during a war like the Second World War. In the pink here, we get Dora's narrative agenda, really, which is all about rejecting seriousness. She says point blank here, I refuse to talk about the war. I'm not talking about it because it's no carnival. And if she is writing a book which has a carnival spirit, Carter and Dora is not wanting to go and speak for pages and pages and pages about the awfulness of war. So again, it's that shutting out of the misery and the destruction, and basically making the comment, I think, that beauty is never too far away with these flowers and with this zebra, which of course both appeal to some extent to magic realism here. You have also, like we were saying for chapter 3 in the green section, got some reference to crudeness and sex, because while there was a blackout and this zebra was running down the high street, Dora was having sex with a soldier in a garret somewhere. So again, you do have this mixing of magic realism and beauty with crudeness, bringing the tone, I suppose, back down to earth. So chapter 4 is kind of known as the war chapter. It's also to do with very much Grandma Chance's death, getting ready for this party that they're going to Melchior's in chapter 5. It's also about Saskia and Imogen's 21st birthday party, and really reinforcing Saskia as the comic villain. But this is how chapter 4 begins, at least. And finally, chapter 5. Significantly, when you think about the beginning of chapter 1, this idea of a binary between left and right side of the tracks, or the north and south side of the river, we now have this idea of crossing over the river. And with comedy, we're going to get reference to reconciliation. And in this chapter, Melchior does finally acknowledge paternity of the children after 75 years. So crossing the river there suggests that they're making inways into their main family, which they've always felt slightly excluded by, both culturally and in terms of familiarly as well. Daffs and tulips tell us that this is spring, and spring, of course, is often about renewal and rejuvenation. And comedy can often have a rejuvenating force if you think about the way Peregrine and Tiffany come back to life in this chapter. Very much to do with that sense of renewal. That in this novel, even characters that we have thought have perished come back to life, meaning that death is not the end. And that really does create a celebratory atmosphere at the end, if not quite absurd. We are reminded that birthday wind, that Dora and Nora are 75 today, Perry and Melchior are 100. It also Shakespeare's birthday, St George's Day. So this day, April 23rd, is a significant day. And in the yellow section, finally, we have a reminder that we're dealing here with a celebrity family. This is describing all of the paparazzi who are outside the family home, taking pictures of everybody that enters for tomorrow's newspapers or tomorrow's magazines. So again, it's a reminder that we're dealing here with a well-known celebrity family, and they have lived their lives effectively on stages or on screens. That's, of course, one of the reasons I think why Dora is writing her memoirs. Yes, it is possible for a non-celebrity, so to speak, to write a memoir. There might not be much need for it. It might not get a lot of readers, but because she is known, she gets PhD students coming up to her all the time asking for autographs and things. because there's a market in it. Celebrities are often asked to do a memoir and autobiography to make money, essentially. So that's perhaps another reason why she is writing her memoir. And that memoir, being surrounded by memorabilia, is of course what she is using to tell us this story. So that is the way in which the 5 chapters begin. And like I said at the beginning, I always do this activity at the beginning of the Wise Children module because I like students to prepare themselves or to have a think about what to expect, and also to get used to the narrative style and some of the main aspects of comedy, but also some of the main themes as well. So hopefully that was useful, and thank you very much for watching.